Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Red Game Silicon video, Intel have offered a solution to i7-7700K owners to avoid high temperatures. So for those of you who are not familiar with the issue, quite often if you're overclocking, temperatures for this particular processor can spike up pretty damn high. 90 degrees or higher is not uncommon. And considering the thermal threshold for these chips is around 100°C, that's not exactly ideal. So, I know what you're going to say. Okay, so what's the solution? I'm pretty sure you're thinking it's going to be a highbrow solution, extremely technical. Perhaps you might have to RMA your chips. Perhaps there's going to be a BIOS update. What's going to happen? Well, okay, you might need to write this down because it is pretty technical. So I'll give you a moment. Okay, you ready? You don't overclock it. Now, I know, once again, you're probably thinking to yourself, that's a bit technical. Can you explain that again? Well, essentially, Intel have told you, just don't overclock the processor then. I'll read out the spokesman post, which is on Intel's community forums, which was picked up by the Register. It's a pretty lengthy quote, so bear with me. We appreciate the feedback you have provided and your patience as we investigate this behaviour. Its behaviour on the 7th generation Intel Core i7-7700K, showing momentary temperature changes from idle, is normal while completing a task, like opening a web browser or any other application or program. In our internal investigation, we did not observe temperature variations outside the expected behaviour and recommended specifications. For processor specifications, please refer to the processor specifications. Okay. Most motherboard manufacturers offer customizable fan speed settings that may allow for smoother transitions of fan revolutions per minute, RPM. Please consult motherboard's manual. We do not recommend running outside the processor's specifications, such as exceeding processor frequency or voltage specifications, or removing the integrated heat spreader called delidding, as these actions will void the warranty. So essentially what they're saying here is that temperature spikes are normal when you're doing something like, I don't know, gaming or whatever, because obviously the processor is doing more workload, put under more workload, therefore, well, you know, temperatures spike. That's all normal. But here's the thing, and I have multiple things with this, but I'm going to try to keep them consolidated into just a few concise points. First of all, you're not recommending that you overclock, but you're selling the K variant, specifically suggesting that it has an unlocked multiplier. Having an unlocked multiplier implicitly is for the purpose of overclocking. You're not doing it because you want to spend an extra set of cash on the processor to have a K at the end of the processor. No. You're doing it because you want it unlocked to overclock it. Second point. Well, with the voltage specifications, once again, while you can possibly increase the clock speed a little bit, obviously increasing voltage is just normal. And my major point of contention is actually the integrated heat spreader, also known as delidding. Now, I haven't done this personally, simply because, well, I haven't had need to be honest. I'm running a 6700K and Ryzen CPU, so I haven't really tested this. But here's the thing, I don't need to because other folks on the internet have. For example, Tech Power Up have a rather interesting example where what they did, I'm going to simplify it for the sake of this particular video, but they delidded the processor, replaced the TIM, in other words the thermal compound which is inside the CPU, and then relidded it, so they put the lid back on, and guess what the difference is? Well, pretty profound actually. Before, the ambient temperatures of the package was hitting around 55 degrees. After, with silicon glue, it was hitting around 34 or 30 degrees. So 34 to 30 degrees depending on either silicon or super glue. Another user who was reporting on the Anantech forum, they managed to reduce their temperatures by 30 degrees. I'm just going to repeat that. 30. What the hell? That is profound. That is not minuscule. That is absolutely ridiculous. Beforehand, his temperature was hitting 99 degrees. And then it went down to 66. Now, obviously, there are some points that need to be raised here. First of all, if you have not already done so and you own a Kaby Lake processor, update your BIOS straight off the bat, because, well, your CPU is possibly putting in your motherboard is putting in extra juice, possibly, than what's required. Second thing, whether you are overclocking or not overclocking, do not have auto voltage. Figure out what the minimum voltage is you need to apply for a particular clock speed, and then keep it keep it manual, because a lot of BIOSes, and I'm not going to point to specific manufacturers because, to be honest, most of them were guilty with the early revisions, quite frankly, were just putting too much voltage into the CPU, and there was a reason behind that. There's a couple of reasons. One, they weren't really sure of the quality of the silicon when Intel were manufacturing it. So, in other words, they wanted to essentially, well, make sure that it worked out the gate. So the best way they could do that is to slightly overshoot voltages, because obviously if you're trying to achieve a specific clock speed, putting more voltage behind it generally means it's more stable. Assuming, of course, the temperature of the chip is not equivalent, to the surface of the sun. The second reason they did it, and this one's a little more suspect, is quite simple. Overclocking results matter, and most folks, when they're overclocking, are kind of lazy, and I'm not really criticising anyway, because I am almost as bad, and a lot of the time, to be honest, when I'm doing quick CPU overclocking tests, just, for my own personal amusement, a lot of the time I'm kind of lazy, and I just leave auto voltages for the most part, unless I'm really trying to scrape the maximum clock speed out of my system. And a lot of motherboards, they have auto overclocking features as well. Now, the reason that's really important is because that essentially means that a lot of people, they just don't get around to really fine-tuning their system. Now, long term, you should do that, because obviously it means you're going to get much better temperatures. The thing is, most people don't, and I'm not saying that these users are not doing that, because obviously that is not the case. If you're really tweaking and trying to overclock, then there's a good chance you have probably done that. And so delidding, I'm not recommending you do it. That's down to you if you decide to. If you do decide to delid, I would probably recommend you try out a specific tool to do it, because it makes it a bit safer. I have not used these particular tools myself, but judging from what I'm looking at them, judging from what I'm hearing about them rather, there's a couple that's pretty well known. There's the Rock kit, and there's also Aqua computer versions, and they both basically do the same thing. They essentially delid the processor in a more safer environment rather than a hammer and a chisel. Okay, slightly exaggerating, but you get the general gist of things. Obviously, if you do delid the processor and it breaks, don't blame me, pretty much. I have just a couple of other small things to point into this video, and yes, I'm going to have to bring Intel's competitor into it, because, well, I don't really have a choice, do I? And that is AMD. Obviously, Ryzen has somewhat eaten into Intel's market share, but stuff like this will probably increase the chance that that market share will erode further. And I don't say that with any glee at all, because it doesn't do the market any good. This is not the reason that I want Intel to lose market share. I want Intel to lose market share because of, AMD innovating more, not because of just silliness like this. In fact, another pretty bizarre thing which has happened, and perhaps from complacency standpoint, is Intel have just recently patched a 9-year-old security bug which was hidden in chips from 2008. And this is basically an escalation of privilege vulnerability which took place in Intel's active management technology, also known as AMT. Now, I just want to point out that this vulnerability does not exist on Intel-based consumer PCs, so it's mostly small business type of issues that are really going to be affected, but still, that's kind of annoying, right? Especially if you are one of the ones affected. I also do not want to come across that I believe AMD are angels in this, because they're not. AMD have paid, or rather have made you pay for the privilege of having unlocked chips in the past. And the fact that Ryzen is unlocked is really not because AMD are being altruistic. Instead, it's because they are in the underdog position. that means, quite simply, that AMD therefore need to outdo their competitors, and they realise that one of the key selling points they can have, especially for enthusiasts or gamers, because I do classify enthusiasts and gamers as somewhat slightly different. After all, you can be an enthusiast and just be really into the technology, trying to overclock the absolute best you can, or maybe more into the 3D rendering side or whatever. On the other hand, gamers could possibly do a little bit of overclocking, but it's not really their purpose of owning a machine. Either way, both of those sets of individuals are going to be very much interested in the fact that any Ryzen chip can overclock. Because even if you're not necessarily buying Ryzen for the purposes of overclocking, let's say for the sake of argument you buy, I don't know, a Ryzen 7 1700, you might not have any intention of overclocking right this minute. You might say, hey, I'm quite happy with the default cooler or Wraith cooler. But maybe in the future, that future might never come, you might never actually overclock that chip, but it's a nice selling point, it's a nice optional extra. On the other hand, if AMD were on top and Intel were on the back foot, would we have this situation? Would AMD be so giving? Well, maybe. They have in the past with certain chips. We know, for example, the old Venice 64, Athlon 64 Venices were very overclockable, and there were certainly other chips which were, but they have certainly made you pay in the past for the privilege of overclocking the chip. Either way, from my point of view, from Intel, this is kind of a crappy answer. And I'm not saying that Kaby Lake is a crap chip. I actually really like the platform. I think that the 270 platform is a really good platform as a whole. I've tested a couple of motherboards on it. We've got one coming up as a review, and it's quite solid. And even for gaming, I still think under certain conditions it's better than Ryzen. I'm not saying it's overall better than Ryzen, but just certain games do run better at the moment on Intel. Is that going to be the case in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? I don't know, quite frankly. But for now, Intel certainly does have certain usages, especially for applications which don't require so many threads, but really respond well to higher clock speeds. So, yeah, it's just a bizarre situation, quite frankly. And it's not exactly the most PR of moves, and as you can imagine, it's made certain people, I don't think I need to explain those people, pretty pissed actually at Intel. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.